Good evening, everyone. My name is Philip McGarry. I'm the president of the library, and thank you for coming along to tonight's Boundaries and Borders is Linen Hall's new project that explores the meanings and realities of borders and boundaries in Northern Ireland over the past century, featuring an exhibition and a programme of events. If you haven't the chance to see the exhibition, please do so, and it will be up until the end of December. And we're very grateful to the Department of Foreign Affairs Reconciliation Fund for supporting this programme, as they have other programmes in the past. And of course, if you really want to support the library, you're very welcome to consider joining us. And again, talk to staff afterwards if necessary, or indeed, you can do that online. We have a tremendous programme this evening, really, and with two excellent speakers. First of all is the former First Minister of Northern Ireland, Baroness Arlene Foster DBE. I was actually looking today on our YouTube website of a video, and I think Baroness Foster looking very well in the bed in her dressing gown. If you go on the YouTube website, the 2nd of February 2022, where we actually did a reading of Molly's soliloquy, the last chapter of Ulysses, on the 100th anniversary of the publication, and with 24 local women who did that. So it's not. I say that both of our speakers have been committed to politics for a long time, but politics touches people in a very personal way in Northern Ireland. I particularly think of Tommy Gorman, who was the, I'm going to say, legendary RTE Northern Ireland editor. And when he retired from the job, he was being interviewed, and he asked him about some of his key points during his time. And he talked of how he had been to Arlene's father's house after he had died, and how Arlene brought him in to see her father in the coffin with the scar on the head, because of course he was well aware and reported many times how her father had been shot in the head by the IRA. So politics does touch people in Northern Ireland. And again, our other very eminent guest tonight, the former Taoiseach of Ireland, Mr. Bertie Ahern. And many of us will recall that during the week of the Good Friday Agreement, Mr. Ahern's mother died. And I just looked up the archives from the government documents at the time, and a very brief conversation between the Taoiseach at that time, Mr. Ahern, and Tony Blair. And Tony Blair is saying, "Bertie, I know you're going to your mother's funeral tomorrow. Mr. Ahern, she goes to the church tonight, Tony. Tony Blair, I'm so sorry for you. You don't want to be thinking about the talks tonight and tomorrow." And Mr. Ahern responded, "It's okay. There was no better woman. She would want to see me trying to solve the problem." And I think that, again, we can see the contribution both of our speakers have made to politics in Northern Ireland tonight. So finally, thank you for coming along, and I hope you will enjoy tonight's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, President.
Over to our presenter, Mark Simpson. Mark is famously a Manchester United fan, perhaps even more so than Mr. Ahern. But even as far as the fact that he, on his honeymoon, where does he go? It's based around going to a Man United match. You know. Now, it did happen to be in Barcelona in his favour anyway, indeed. So, Mark, thank you indeed for hosting this evening.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you. I'm very struck by your opening, because it's an old cliche, but it's a reminder that politics is about human beings. It's about people. Those two stories that Philip told about two funerals. And Bertie, I was outside. I couldn't believe it when you came back that Wednesday night Arlene, you were inside. Can we start with the personal, Arlene? Can you remember the first time you met Bertie?
So I hope this is working, yeah. So it was probably around that time, Belfast Agreement time. I was an officer of the Ulster Unionist Party. You'll remember at the time I was appointed to that position back in 1995. I was just 25, so now everybody knows what age I am. So, so I would have been inside at that time, yeah, absolutely.
And Bertie, tell us about the first time you came across. She maybe was Arlene Kelly back in those days. Yes, tell us.
Well, I think at that...
Hold that orange mic up. I know it may be difficult.
I promise. I think at that time we were meeting, and, you know, that was a stressful and very busy time, and I have to say probably more for officers maybe than some of the rest of us, because it was a huge workload, and if that run from September, you know, 97 right through to to Good Friday was a hugely busy time, and, you know, Castle Buildings was a really hard-working place, and in fairness to all of the people involved, and Arlene was one of them, and, you know, working with our leader, that it was... I had great admiration for the people who just kept going, because there was ups and downs during it, like there always is in negotiations, but people had to work very hard.
When you think of what was on the table, things like, you know, changing Articles 2 and 3, that couldn't have been done without your say. So did you feel pressure at the time to come back?
Well, no, there was no alternative to not coming back. I mean, you had to be there. I mean, it was just, you can't plan how these things fall out, and that's life. You get on with it. And in fairness, and it's my admiration for the profession of politics. It's moaned and groaned at in lots of places, but my experience of politicians, whether I agree with them or disagree with them or arguing with them or not, or working with them, they're very hard-working people and committed to what they're doing. So I think in all of these things, it's a team effort, whether you're on one side or the other, and people have to get on with it. And, you know, those months and weeks, it was about getting on with it and doing our best to bring it to whatever conclusion we could. And for the years afterwards, I mean, I never saw that as the end. I mean, all these things just go on and on.
Well, we are going to get on to our topic now, which is border and boundaries. Borders and Boundaries, or Bertie and the Baroness, is the subtitle, I'm told, on Twitter tonight.
Oh, right.
And I do want to talk about the personal as well as the political. We're going to go until about 6:45, maybe 6:50. Then I'd like to take your questions from the audience. We'll go on till 7 o'clock. If you want to stay on, we'll maybe go on a little bit past that. But if people think it's ending at 7 o'clock on the dot, don't worry. You can walk out the door. But we probably will go on to about 7:15. I've asked our guests here, and they're happy enough with that. So Arlene Foster, Baroness Foster, you grew up very close to the border. What are your earliest memories?
So yes, for people who don't know, I grew up in a little place called Dernawilt, which is 4 miles from Rosslea on one side and 3 miles from Clonus on the other side, Clonus of course being in County Monaghan. And so I was very aware of the border growing up. My father was a police officer. He was a police officer in Rosslea, so he would have travelled in and out to Rosslea every day. And we just got on with our lives. I lived in a lovely rural place. I walked to Sunday school when my father was working on a Sunday, because there was only one car in the family in those days. And we had a lovely existence. And despite the fact that the troubles were clearly going on around us, my father and mother always made sure that we had a very normal life, going to school, going to parties. I was born in July, so we had parties in the hayfield. It was a lovely time. But then, of course, when my father was shot by the IRA on the 4th of January 1979, things changed, and we had to move away from our home to a, in quotes, safer area of Fermanagh, which was Lisnaskea, which was 9 miles away. And that was a big wrench, of course, for a 9-year-old, leaving your school, leaving your friends, having to leave your home. So I was very conscious then of why I had to leave, and the fact that there was something seriously wrong at that time. And that's really my formative years, and then growing up in Lisnaskea, but always knowing that the home place was back very close to the border.
Would you have crossed the border much as a teenager or as a child?
No, certainly not as a teenager, because that road to Clonus frankly, was blown up because a lot of the small border roads, you'll remember this, Bertie, were blown up so that people wouldn't be able to go across them. And any road that was open had a border checkpoint at it, so we wouldn't really have gone, which was a complete change from the 40s, 50s and 60s, because my grandmother made Irish lace. She was very fine crocheted Irish lace, and she used to sell it in Clonus. So she used to go back and forwards. My mother was from Sandy Row in Belfast and used to come down on the train to Clonus Junction to come and see my father before they got married. So there was a lot of to-ing and fro-ing before the Troubles started, but then once the Troubles started, the border was essentially closed.
Dare I say it, Bertie, Arlene doesn't remember the 50s and 60s. You might. Do you remember the first time you went up north and crossed that border?
Yeah, a bit of a difference of age between Baroness and me. I'm born September 51, so decades between us. But I remember well the first time our school tour went to Newcastle, up beside Slieve Donard. And I don't know, it was 5th class or 6th class. I think you had to be a big boy in primary school before you got a decent school tour. Before that, it was just down to the sea or down to Bray or somewhere in County Wicklow. So I remember that school tour well because this was a big thing, and we were going north, and it was terrific. I still remember the day. I don't remember it all, but I remember the day. So we were probably 8 or 9 or something like that, or 10 maybe. And the first time I was conscious that there was a border at all, because it meant zero to me, was when Down won the All-Ireland final in 1960. I live in Drumcondra, just a mile from Croke Park, 10 minutes walk. So all these thousands and thousands of people with the black and red flags came down, and they were all in those days. Nobody was staying in hotels, or no arguments about hotels. They were sleeping in the cars and out around the streets and on the footpaths, and great atmosphere around the area. We as kids thought this was terrific. But I remember it meant a lot to my dad. That the Sam Maguire Cup was going north of the border for the first time. So that's the first time I was conscious of what's the difference if it's going to Kerry or Cork. But I remember I got it, that it was going somewhere else, and they were my early memories.
Did it feel different? I mean, it's a long time ago, it's more than 60 years, but were you conscious of, or do you remember crossing the border? Did it feel any different up north?
Absolutely no difference to me. In fact, from our point of view, it was great. We were going a long way away from home, and in fact, we're going up to a lovely place. I've been in Newcastle many, many times. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And in fact, we were up along the coast and the sea, and that was terrific. So, and everyone really nice to us, and no problems. So, as a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, it was just a great day out, and I don't remember anything about security, anyone stopping the bus, anything. I've no memories of that other than a great school day out.
And before we leave the 50s, 60s and 70s, Arlene, were you very consciously not crossing the border, or it just wasn't within your sphere of influence or family sphere?
Well, probably family sphere, because my father was a police officer, so it wouldn't have been particularly safe to go across the border, which again was a change, because when he was growing up in the 40s and 50s, he would have been across the border at Orange Halls in Monaghan, in Newbliss at dances and things like that. So there were great stories about him taking the bicycle and bringing a girl home on a bicycle, the back of the bicycle from Newbliss Orange Hall. So, I mean, it would have happened in the 50s and 60s. There was no difficulty. But in the 70s, then it became a problem because of the violence that was going on. And that's why I didn't have the opportunity to do that.
And when did you get a kind of political feeling about the border? I mean, as a unionist, that shapes you.
Well, I think probably through my teenage years, I was always very interested in current affairs and history. And people have said to me, is that because of what happened to your father that you took an interest? And I can't answer that, because you don't know who you would have been if that hadn't happened to you. So I got involved in politics once I came to Queen's University in student union politics, which was a bit of a bear pit, as you remember, in the late 80s,
I think
early 90s.
you were a baby barrister, weren't you?
Yeah, well, that was later. That was at the time of the Belfast Agreement. Some of us were titled baby barristers, even though some of us weren't barristers at the time.
Or babies.
Or babies, rather. Yeah, poor Drew Nelson, you'll remember, the late Drew Nelson, the late David Brewster. They were in that group as well. So, yeah, but I suppose Queen's really was my political nursery, if I can put it like that.
Same question to you, Bertie. Where was your political nursery? When did you decide, I'm going to be a politician?
In secondary school, I was on the debating team in secondary school, and we had a great teacher who was, trying to help us and force us and educate us best she could, to take an interest in what was going on around us. And the civil rights movement was, we're fifth year with the civil rights movement. So she started creating debates around what the civil rights movement was about and who were the people involved and, who John Hume was and, what was going on. So it was very much for the debating, and it was the fun of debating and trying to beat the other schools in the area. But all that 68, 69, for the obvious reasons, in the secondary schools, the topic was the civil rights movement, and it was about, and it wasn't just civil rights in Northern Ireland either. It was the Paris riots were going on, the Ducek was going on in Prague, in America, the Martin Luther King. So she was an excellent teacher who was doing her best to try and broaden our horizons and what was going on around the world. So, and none of that was on the curriculum. It's not like nowadays where the curriculums are broad and, far better than they.
And your podcast is now on the curriculum down south as well.
Yeah, which means I'm definitely old if your podcast is on the curriculum. If the kids are learning about it, then you're ancient. But it's, I think it's good for I think, kids in school. School kids now are talking about Ukraine and Gaza and the other things that are topical. I think that's good for children.
And at what age and why Fianna Fáil?
Well, that was probably my father and mother would have been big Fianna Fáil supporters. My father and mother were both from Cork. Everyone thinks I'm 99% a Dub, but they were Cork. They came to Dublin. They met in Dublin, and both of them would have been, Fianna Fáil supporters, and in our local area, in Drumcondra, in those days, Fianna Fáil was the dominant party. We were a very strong political party. So, and then there was a good-looking girl who lived about 4 doors away from me, who asked me would I join, and I asked her, and when she was a member, I joined. And that was the main motivation, to be honest.
That's very honest. Is she about still? We would love to interview her.
She is, but she married someone else.
That's not what I asked. Is she still about? And Arlene, I was there, so I know the answer to this. But tell me about why you decided to join the Ulster Unionist Party, because you had other options as well back then.
Yes, I had. But a bit like Bertie, the Ulster Unionist Party was very, very strong in Fermanagh. I think everybody, in fact, still to this day, Fermanagh would still be a very strong place for Ulster Unionism. And then when I went up to Queen's University, I can actually name the person that got me into the Queen's Ulster Unionist Party.
Were they good looking like Bertie's friend? No?
Well, I'll let the audience decide. Lord Peter Weir got me into the Ulster
Very good looking.
and a couple of others. So I signed up on Freshers' Day, and that's how I got involved.
Why the Ulster Unionist Party?
Well, as I say, it was the dominant force at that time.
But did you not have
in Queen's University as well as in Fermanagh, it was just the most natural thing to do to join the Ulster Unionist Party. In fact, I don't even think the DUP had a very strong, if at all, presence at Queen's University in the late 80s, early 90s. I know Ian Jr. was there at the time, but I don't think there was an association at the time.
And fast forward that decision to jump from one party to another. It's not quite the equivalent of going from Rangers to Celtic, but it's a big jump.
It's definitely not
definitely
going from
not,
Rangers to Celtic. It's I don't even know the Scottish equivalent. But anyway, if my son was here, he'd be able to tell me what it was.
Well, tell me about your son. Your son was at a table quiz, I'm told, last week, and there was a picture round, and there was a picture of you. What did somebody put down as who that was?
Well, I was relating to Bertie saying, you're old when you're on the curriculum. What was written down was Ben's owl doll. Right. As an answer to a table quiz question. So I used to be Ben's mum, but I'm now Ben's owl doll. So what were we talking about?
Where we're going from the DUP.
We're talking about the shift, yes, absolutely. So Bertie will know full well, at the time of the Belfast Agreement, we had concerns about legacy, about victims' issues, and about accountability issues. And we tried to work through those in the Ulster Unionist Party from 98 up until 2003. Actually, yesterday was the anniversary of my election to Stormont. So 20 years ago.
As an Ulster Unionist?
As an Ulster Unionist, yeah, absolutely. And there was a real battle going on in the Ulster Unionist Party at that time. On the airwaves, it was playing out on the airwaves, so there's nothing new under the sun around the difficulties within the Ulster Unionist Party. And it came to a head in December, and I left in December of 2003.
And speaking of the Belfast Agreement or Good Friday Agreement, Bertie, you did an interview with Arlene on GB News earlier this year. Mm-hmm. And you spoke about two issues that you thought could have been handled better, if not on the day, but in the years that followed. I think they were arms decommissioning and legacy. Could you tell us a little bit more about your reflections?
Yeah, I actually thought prisoners might cause the biggest problem out of all the issues, and I was worried about that one anyway, for lots of reasons. I think that was handled maybe well. I'm not saying it didn't cause some problems, but it was something that worried us all, I think, at the time. But we had set a definite date on the prisoners issue. We set on licence within a 2-year period. And that, of course, was a compromise on various things. People went with 1 year, others didn't want anything. So decommissioning, there was kind of a view that decommission was a 2-year period. Now, it didn't say that in the agreement. No, I think for all our concerns, if that had happened within a 2-year period, which it should have had, and I think what I said to Arlene in that interview, I said many times, if that had happened, I think things would have been different, because the fact that dragged out to 2003, and okay, you look back now and you say, that's 20 years ago, what difference did that make? But it made a lot of difference at the time. Instead of if it had been a 2-year issue, and if we had been able to deal with it in the 2-year, we would have saved an awful lot of energy, and the institutions wouldn't have been down at that time, and I think would have made life far better. On legacy, we didn't do much discussions on legacy, quite frankly. It wasn't really discussed at all, other than we knew it was an issue that was going to have to be dealt with. And I think it was Weston Park, whenever that was, 2001 or 2000, when we started discussing the legacy issue. But we all knew that the legacy issue wasn't going to resolve itself. I mean, all these things, you have to have a plan, or you have to have a set of rules, and the more you see of it, and I'd been dealing with the legacy issue of the Dublin Monaghan bombings, because it was in my own constituency, and because you're in the centre city, like last week, you tend to get all these issues in your own constituency. But and I knew how hard that was. I mean, we never really got to the end of it. I mean, quite frankly, 20 years on, 25 years on, you never get to the end of it. So I think that they were the two things. It would have been nice if we had been able. Now, some people would say, Meaty, why didn't you? Well, I always remember what happened. George Mitchell got fed up with the whole lot of us. And when his wife, Heather, had the baby boy, and he was going to get out altogether, and then he came back. So we literally had a period from about the 17th, 18th of March, after St. Patrick's Day, to the 10th of April to resolve everything. And when you look back at it, I suppose we resolved an awful lot, but they were two issues that we didn't
Interesting, you can still remember those dates now, 25 years on.
Forever.
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 And Arlene, just briefly remind us, what was the one issue, maybe there was more than one issue, that made you walk out with Jeffrey?
No, it was the issue around release of prisoners,
Okay.
victims issues, and since then, and Bertie and I have been on different stages talking about this recently, reconciliation really hasn't been something that we've concentrated on. People, I mean, this is the Reconciliation Fund that's funding this. We're still talking about reconciling 25 years on, and I think sometimes we have easy conversations, but we don't have the difficult conversations about what does reconciliation actually mean. So I think it's a real challenge.
You've known me a long time. I'm not looking at cheap headline here, but would you now admit 25 years later that there were aspects of the agreement that maybe you could have been more positive about at the time?
Well, I think so. And I mean, before Lord Trimble passed away, he very graciously invited myself and Bertie and a number of others to the unveiling of his portrait at Queen's University. And we had a discussion there about what David got right at that time. And David was an academic, and he absolutely got right the principle of consent. And no doubt Bertie can talk ad nauseum about how long that took to get over the line and all of the things around that. But what David, and I think he would have acknowledged this at the end, what he didn't really think about was the softer issues, the issues around legacy, the issues around victims, reconciliation, those issues. The guns, of course, was a huge issue at the time. And he looked at it from an academic point of view, and he was absolutely entitled to do that. But those other elements had to be sorted out as well, and they weren't. And I accept that it was at the end, as with every agreement, and we've seen this happening, you have to come to a funnel moment where everything's in a funnel and you just come towards the end. But you have to make a call, and probably not because I'd lost anybody. Thankfully, my father survived. Thankfully, I survived the bus bomb. All of those things I had survived. But I knew so many people who had lost loved ones. We all did. And to see terrorists walking out of jail and not facing justice whilst they and the memory of their loved ones wasn't being dealt with in a meaningful way, I think was too much for me.
Bertie, you were there for that conversation with David Trimble. It must have been quite a moment, because here was a man who knew he was in his latter years.
Yeah, days at that stage, I think almost weeks, so it was quite, and I had a one-to-one with him earlier, and then we met as a group, and you know, I've said it many times, I had great regard for David. I mean, when I met David first, I can tell you, you know, the discussions weren't so polite, you know. That
wouldn't be like David.
and you know, it took a bit of time to get used of David, and you know, as I said many times, he used to stand up and shout at me, and you know, he was quite interesting. I never really listened to him actually till he calmed down again. But anyway, but when he calmed down again, we had very good discussions, and he came to me in Dublin, my office, and we had really friendly discussions, and I got to really like him. And he did, in fairness to him, I think, on a number of occasions when things could have went desperately wrong, David made a call, and I think he made those right calls. And I agree with Arlene, maybe some of the things weren't, and I readily agree some of the calls we all made weren't right. But the talks wouldn't have started at all in September '97. If he didn't decide to stay in the talks. And that would have been a disaster, because we learned that Christmas, when we broke up at Christmas, that the violence quickly started again. So by getting us into the talks was definitely, even though there was no agreement, when the focus is on the talks, and I think it applies in politics everywhere, where the focus is on discussions and debate, no matter how rancorous they are, it takes it away from the streets. And when the politicians are not talking anywhere in the world, then it's on the street. And later on, you know, David made other calls that I think were very brave. Now, the prisoners issues, the arms issue, the reconciliation issue, you know, were very difficult issues. And even when we came to Weston Park, I, at that stage, had talked to the clerk, and we talked to Mandela, great people, and we had looked at the South African model, and we had talked about maybe the South African model might be a good model. Quite frankly, that's 22 years ago now, or more. And there was no takers for that. So, Arlene is right. There are some issues on the reconciliation and trying to deal with that healing, and that are still there, and they won't vanish. And whether it was some of the discussions in Weston Park over 20 years ago, or whether it was the Stormont House Agreement, or whether it's maybe what's going on in some of the talks now, that there are issues that have to be resolved, and I still think that there's a lot of work to do in that, because there's still a lot of people who are hurt and sore, and rightly so, and can't move on. And the problem now is you can get into almost a next generation. Yeah. I had a meeting not too long ago in Dublin where on the Dublin Monaghan bombings, and I didn't say it to them, but I could see in the room by the age that none of them were born when the Dublin Monaghan bombings, but still they were very united, everything, and so these are problems that we still have to deal with.
You talk about reconciliation, and I want to talk about the overall title tonight, Border Identity, just for the last 5 or 10 minutes before opening it up to questions. And you both talked about the lack of reconciliation at a certain level, but the very fact that we're here tonight and just looking around, with loyalists, Republicans, Unionists, Nationalists, a lot of none of the above, probably a lot more of none of the above than we would have had 25 years ago. The fact that you two get on so well. Are we maybe being a little bit negative, Arlene, about how far we have come in the past quarter of a century?
Yeah, I think there's an element of that. I'm going to quote C.S. Lewis. Day by day, nothing seems to change, but when you look back, everything is different. And that is...
Give me that again.
Day by day, nothing seems to change, but when you look back, everything is different.
Like watching your children growing up.
C.S. Lewis, who died 60 years ago last week, a wonderful, wonderful man, and somebody who is a bit of a go-to for me in regards to literature. But there is an element of that, but on the transgenerational piece, I do worry, because there's a lot of young people out there who didn't experience what I experienced, what Bertie experienced, what people in this room might have experienced, and yet they're talking about it as if they did. And, the up the Ra stuff and all of this sort of thing, which is just not acceptable. We have to, if we're seriously talking about moving on, then we have to recognise what is wrong and what is right. And we have to have those discussions and we have to have those conversations. So I think a civic discussion like this is very good, but we also have to get down into the grassroots and get down to understand what's going on there as well.
Bertie?
Yeah, I agree with that, because ultimately, recently I brought in the international group, and we were down on the Peace Wall, and I had them here for a few days, and they met everybody. We were in City Hall, and we met all the political parties. They were highly impressed with what they were hearing, but they, at the end of it, and the letters, and they still did write me letters, not emails, but they got some good letters back, and these people were all in politics in different parts of the world, Nigeria and Colombia and Bolivia and places that know things. But I think all of them said, about those peace walls. They were very impressed with those people. But why are they there? Or why did you keep on talking about legacy? Or you could see the questions that they were still when they went home in their long flights. That they were wondering why these things were still outstanding. And they were saying, if everyone agreed with the Stormont House Agreement, why didn't you just implement the Stormont House Agreement? But of course, it's all the simplistic things of all these things were easy. So I would like, to answer your question very directly, Mark, I would like that these issues, could be dealt with, closed as best you can. I'm very conscious you can't close things off in people's lives very best, and that we can move on with a new generation, and we can move on this island with a very different atmosphere to the future. I mean, the big things for people's lives are people can have they can have their families, the intergenerational contacts of families, that you can move around wherever you want to move around, that you can get jobs and get education and good welfare society, and that we can, these are the things that are important in life. And I must say I was highly impressed tonight to see City Hall and the market and the buzz around there, and sure people of all denominations and none. And that's lovely, and I think they're the things that we need to be getting, because there is still hate. So I don't want to dodge this thing. My own constituency last week,
yes,
I mean, there was raw hate, small numbers, but raw hate, and they have this thing in their head, whether it's motivated out of ideology or what, but they prepare to burn things and do things because they think we should not be bringing in the new Irish into Dublin. Now, there's maybe an argument about the numbers, but the local primary school I was talking to this morning, there's 30 nationalities, and I'm always entertained by some particularly Dublin mothers, and they say to me, Bert, we have no problem with this nationality, and I don't want to mention the nationality, but we have every problem with that nationality. And I said, hold on a second. That nationality and the other nationality are exactly the same colour. Oh, but we know the difference. And I said, well, how the hell do you know the difference? But they have this thing, and it's hate, and it's been fermented by a small number of people, but that's dangerous. And of course, that damn social media, which I would ban if I had any power, which I haven't. But that is really, driving this kind of stuff, and it's dangerous, and it applies everywhere, and this kind of stuff goes on, and it goes on to the next generation, and we need to be careful.
Two last quick questions, and we'll open this to the floor. Bertie, you signed an agreement which puts border identity at the heart of the assembly here. You've got to designate as one or the other in terms of your border identity for your vote to count on crucial votes 25 years on. Do you think that's maybe past its sell-by date?
Yeah, I think I'd love to see the institutions up. I think we all would. But if that was up, there are a number of issues, and I don't think we should narrow it down to just one or two, but there are a number of issues that should be looked at. And I think somebody should be given the task, if we get everything moving, of going back over those issues, and in the calm light of day, try to deal with those issues. Because the one thing, we only had one review, and that was 2006, and that was a good review. I mean, it got things moving. So it's good time for having another review in 25 or 24 and get on and deal with those issues. I think they're all doable, but they should be done calmly. There's no need for people to get up on butterboxes shouting about them. I think they can be dealt with.
And I'm going to end with the tabloid question for you both. The future of the border. Who wants to go first?
Don't understand the question.
Well, how do you see the future? You're what, 51, Arlene, 52?
I'm 53.
53, there you are. I'm trying to soften you up. How do you see the future of the border while you're alive?
Well, you see, the border, after the Belfast Agreement and the military installations and the roads were reopened again, had become something that was there, but wasn't there. It's like the man who wasn't there. So it was about neighbourliness. It was about Bertie, and those people knew about being good neighbours. And I think we need to get back to that. And I mean, the border is going to be here because people are still very much wanting to be in the United Kingdom. If you look at any opinion polls, that's the case. So this whole movement that the border's going to disappear in 10 years or whatever, it's not. So therefore you have to be pragmatic, and you have to have neighbourliness with your neighbours on the border, and that's what I think the future of the border should be.
Thank you. Bertie, final word.
I think the issue will go on because it's in the agreement, and if it wasn't in the agreement that at some stage there would be votes, then we probably wouldn't have got an agreement. I mean, that's just a fact of life. But I'm far more interested in that we continue to build a peaceful society, that we can get on with each other, and that we build the relationship even better than we have. I just think there's so many small things we can do, and I honestly, I would felt that if the North-South bodies had been on, if we had been dealing with health issues and agricultural issues, and it didn't have to be implementation bodies, it didn't have to be the formal issues, but the informal issues, that if we build those things up, then a lot of these things don't matter. I mean, people will get on, and whether people want to be in the UK or whether they want to be in okay, that's get into political heavyweight issues. There's a whole lot of other things that can be dealt with before that, and I just love to see organisations working together, cooperating together, doing things together, and then we don't have to get ourselves hung up on all these contentious issues.
Bertie, thank you. Arlene, thank you. I'm going to walk down here and see who's going to have our first question. Oh my goodness, that was nearly a YouTube sensation. You're very quiet at the back here. Anybody got any questions? Do we have any questions? There we are, over here. Do you want to pass the microphone over?
First of all, can I thank both our speakers this evening for your contribution, and also for your contribution to public life, both in Northern Ireland and in the Republic. I'm not saying I would be a supporter of either, but I do acknowledge your great work in public life. My question is basically this to both of you. Do you think it would have been a good idea during the Good Friday Agreement that the issue of prisoner releases and decommissioning that one would go in parallel with the other?
Yeah, I think I've kind of hinted that already, because the amount of times that I've answered the question over the 25 years that prisoners was 2 years and decommission was 2 years. And I said, no, unfortunately, decommission wasn't 2 years. It didn't say that it was 2 years. If it had said 2 years, I can tell you, I would not have been as grey at the age as I would, because the amount of energy that I had to put in from 98 to 2003, and it became that was nearly the issue. And to be honest, I felt bad that it was the ruination of David Trimble. Now, you're funny, an Irish Republican and Fianna Fáil leader have been worried about ruination of David Trimble, but I was, because I thought that was the issue, and I felt bad about that, because decommission had to be dealt with. Like, we couldn't move on, and we lost that valuable space of kind of goodwill and get on with it. So if you ask me now, as I hear on the 9th of April, I would have gladly written in the two of them were on 2 years.
Do you want to say something quick, briefly?
Well, I mean, the question, I think then, Bertie, would have been, would Sinn Féin have gone along with that then at the time? What
you
would
tell Arlie's now an interviewer, can't you? That's my job.
Yes, I've left politics.
Well, that's a fair question. That's fair. But I'd say this, Arlene. With about 3 hours to go, or maybe in the middle of the night on the Friday morning, on that snowy Friday morning, when I set off the security alarms, we're going out to get some air, and met a whole lot of RUC men down with their guns outside. But if I had said at that stage, prisoners was going to be 1 year, like prisoners was jumping around. Sinn Féin wanted 2 years. The Loyalists were happy with one. One of the Loyalist groups was happy not to have any date. So these things were jumping around. So I think the question is, it could have been.
Okay. Have we another question here?
Just reflecting on the title of tonight's debate, border identities. I'm just wondering how much either of you would agree with my view that actually when it comes to a future border poll, whenever that may be, it won't be people who have strong identities on this island who will actually decide the outcome of that vote. Because the people with the strong identities, and they will not change their identities, and they're perfectly entitled to not change their identities, but neither of those two blocks will get more than 50% of a vote. And so, identities become less of an issue, and the issues you were talking about, Mr. Ahern, and indeed even Arlene that you were reflecting on, those day-to-day mundane issues will be the issues that people will vote upon, will they? So it's identity. How important, I guess my question is, how important is people's identity in the future?
Well, I think for some people, so for me, my border identity is important. So yes, that it is important for me, and that'll not change. And I'm sure Republicans would say the opposite. But you're right to say that there are people in the centre who don't think about constitutional issues every day. Most people don't think about constitutional issues every day, and they will be looking at whether it's best for them economically, culturally, socially. So they'll look at a whole range of issues, probably, if the border poll comes, and that's how they'll make their decision. And then it'll be up to the different political parties, the different movements, to argue which is better for people in the longer run. Now, I mean, obviously, I would say that I think people will make the decision to stay in the UK, but people who are Republican will want to argue in a different way. And that, you're right to say that not everybody has strong identities in terms of who they are, and for some people it's not a big issue at all. And that has to be acknowledged.
I think this is a very important issue. 25 years on, even in the language of the Good Friday Agreement, when we're talking about the border poll, we're talking about United Ireland all the way through. I'm just, as we come to Christmas now, just finishing up a series where I've been at several meetings, or several college meetings, you know, the LNH meetings and the Students' Union meetings. And it's all about, and there's been very good representatives of all the political parties in the North. And it's all about the new Ireland. And my view is, so if it was 25 years ago, it would have been identity. Whenever it is, 25 years plus now, whenever the vote, and I think will take place, but I can't tell you when. But it'll be looking at all of the issues of how it would work. And that's where I think the governments and the universities, there's a huge amount of work going on in the universities, academic work. You know, academic work mightn't solve everything, but it will give people a different perspective. And the kind of issues are, how would you amalgamate the Garda Síochána with PSNI? How would the courts join together in the courts?
BBC and RTE?
How would local authority, how BBC would be left behind and RTE would move on? Would Turbiddy get a job back in the new BBC? But, you know, so there are all of these kind of issues, and that's already happening. That's already happening. Like, listen, Arlene and I won't agree on identities. We're not going to agree on identity, but we'll agree on a lot of other things. But to be honest, I'd rather keep the debate that if we can get on with this generation of being peaceful and working together and cooperating in a whole lot of areas, because I'd hate this whole thing to get into a battle of identities, because it'll bring us to grief.
But those are technical issues, though, Bertie, surely. I mean, the technical issue of bringing police forces together, the technical issues. I mean, really, it doesn't deal with unionism and republicanism, because we've had this discussion before. I will be British because that's who I am and what I was born. So I can be British in China or I can be British anywhere in the world. It doesn't mean anything. But from a unionism point of view, that is a political understanding that you're in a United Kingdom. So that's a different argument to the technical work that you are talking about in terms of preparing for a United Ireland.
Yeah, but the point I'm making, I'm not giving you my own view on this. When I've sat through and participated in the debates in the colleges, that's what they're talking about. So they're a different generation. These kids are mainly 18 to 23. That's what they're talking about, and thankfully they're not arguing about the flag or the flag being abused, or like they're talking about how would this work, and that's what they're talking about, which isn't maybe what Arlene and I would talk about.
Question at the back here.
Thank you. Very interesting discussion. Thank you very much for coming. Bertie, thank you for coming up to Belfast. Looking ahead, if the Assembly gets up and running, obviously Michelle O'Neill will be First Minister, and in the Republic right now, Sinn Féin seem to be quite strong, doing quite well. How do you think that will alter the political landscape, north and south?
Well, first of all, say, because I spent many hours of my life agreeing that the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister are exactly the same job. Sorry for being boring, have to restate that. And I wish Martin McGuinness at one stage wanted that nailed absolutely down, that there was no argument, and I'm sorry we didn't do that as well, but that First Minister, Deputy First Minister were exactly the same role, and nobody could work. I think the politics is changing. Like I remember once there was no opinion poll when I was Taoiseach, and Fianna Fáil went down to 37% in the polls, and we called an emergency meeting for 8 o'clock the following morning. Jesus, they'd be having a lot of emergency meetings now. So I mean, things change, and I suppose next year will be an interesting year. We'll have an election in America. We will definitely have an election in Britain. We will have European local elections in the south, probably a general election, but that'll be for a decision. I think it will be. So it'll be an interesting year, and things do change, you know. But I'm a bit, you know, I'm a bit of a believer in the revolutionaries of today or the conservatives of tomorrow. So I don't lose too much sleep on these issues. I think they'll work themselves out.
Hi, Amanda Ferguson up the back here. It's a question for you both. I'm just wondering, do you believe that the DUP's continuing boycott of Stormont is damaging Northern Ireland's union with Britain? And if you could please explain your answer. And also, do you think we're going to get a Christmas miracle?
Well, as a Christian, I always hope for miracles, and I hope that we do see devolution back. But you know, people ignored the fact that there were fundamental problems with the protocol, with the Windsor framework, particularly in the outworkings of both, and those have to be dealt with. It's not like what happened with the 3 years when we didn't have an assembly when Sinn Féin stood out, because I did offer to go in and legislate for a Culture Act at the same time as the assembly was running. And it wasn't a constitutional issue, it was a cultural issue. This is a constitutional issue, and therefore it has to be sorted out. And I do hope that it will be sorted out, and that the MLAs will be able to take up their positions, and we do get ministers in place. And just going back to the Deputy First Minister point, in the first assembly there was an awful lot of talk between First Minister and Deputy First Minister, so much so that First Minister, Deputy First Minister, the D in Deputy First Minister has to be a small d, not a big D, so that you realise that actually the two are of equal status, and they are of equal status. I could not do anything in that office without the agreement of Mark McGuinness or Michelle O'Neill, and it will be the same when Michelle O'Neill is the First Minister. Whoever is the Deputy First Minister, there has to be a joint agreement as to what happens in the office, because it's a joint office, and that office, when it comes about, that's what will happen. So whilst I can understand the nervousness of a lot of unionism in relation to this issue, that is the reality, and therefore they have to understand that it is a joint office and there will be a unionist and a nationalist in the office.
Very quickly, I do hope that the institutions are back up and running. I do hope we're here before Christmas. The alternative is that it'll drift to God knows when, and certainly 25, because next year, election year, drifting 20, and that would be a really tragedy in my view, and quite dangerous in lots of ways as well. That's my view, and I hope, you know, that doesn't come to pass. I totally accept that there were problems out of the Brexit vote. I canvassed against Brexit. I spoke against Brexit. I was one to come up here and warn that if we went down this road, where we'd get to. But anyway, listen, I'm a Democrat. People voted. The Windsor Agreement is there. But if you support the British government, if you support the government that you believe or the government you respect, they did their best in the negotiations. If there are still outstanding issues, and I think there are, I've heard some people tell me that there is, then they should be sorted out. I don't think they have to be sorted out by tearing up the Windsor Agreement and starting again. I don't think that. If there are technical difficulties or problems, they should be sorted out. And the Irish government, if they affect us in some way, they should play their full role in sorting them out. But the opportunities for Northern Ireland are massive. The opportunities of being in the British economy, in the European economy, in the island economy. They're really, really good. And I just hope whatever difficulties are there can be sorted out. And in fairness, I think Jeffrey Donaldson, so far as I can see it, is trying to do that. And I wish him well.
2 more questions, one from the back and then one from the very front.
This will probably be totally counter to what Mr. Ahern has been saying earlier. But in the interest of reconciliation, it seems to me that there are significant problems in identities and so on. Some years ago, I went down to visit the Museum of Orange Heritage. And there were 2 Catholics named in the history of Northern Ireland. One was Seamus Heaney, and the other was Mary McAleese. And as far as I could see, all the other references to Catholics in that history of Northern Ireland in the museum were references to terrorists. Now, it seems to me that I wrote to the curator, director, whatever, about this, and how sad it was that this was the case. And that it seems to me that the sort of line that the former Taoiseach has been spelling out here tonight of let's look at the technicalities and so on, and the future will take care of itself. That seems to be fine, but with such a strong element of history and of hatred, really, I suspect on the Catholic side as well as on the Unionist side, that you wonder about reconciliation and whether reconciliation can take place given the existence of that level of hatred. Sorry.
You know, listen, 25 years on, 30 years ago, people were shooting and killing people and blowing people up. Now people are having sensible discussions and getting on with people. I know there's still major problems, but there's major problems in everything. Like I'd say in my own community, there's people who live in flat blocks in 1-bedroom apartments. Are very envious of people who live around the corner who are in 5-bedroom houses. You know, and you know, there's no great love between them. And when you have a football team, you don't seem to get anyone from the 5-bedroom houses playing with the other kids. So, you know, these things happen all the time. But I think politics is about trying to pull people together and not hate. And I know some of what you've said over the years. I've gone to meetings where there is a lot of riot, but I honestly feel, maybe I'm getting older, but I do feel it's changed substantially, and I do feel we haven't, have we finished, we got to the Holy Grave? No, we haven't, but I think things are changing dramatically. And you know, I was watching now because I live where I live on Drumcondra Road, there's people down every weekend from the north. There's northern cars parked, there's southern cars, there's people from Loyalist tradition, Republican tradition. They're all in the bar at night. Nobody's beating up anybody. They all go to bed. You know, it's very. The only people beating people are up now are some of my own gang down the road who are meant to be all the same. So you know, I always. My mother taught me that the glass was half full, and particularly if I wasn't drinking alcohol. And so I do live in that way of seeing things as the glass is half full. And I think we have to keep on holding the hand of friendship and building on it. And you build every little bit, and you keep on going. If we give up on that, you know, look what's happening in Gaza in the last 50 days. 13,000 people dead for what? For what? I mean, and the last time was 6,000 people dead, and then people are talking about a solution that you're going to leave a place that's 10 kilometres by 23.5 kilometres with 2.3 million people in it. I mean, there are things that I despair at. I do not despair on this island. I think I think it's a great island, a great place, and I honestly think we can live better together, and time will tell, probably after my time, how much better, but I'm an optimist.
Arlene, quick word on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Orange Heritage Centre and the museum obviously looks at things from a particular angle, just as if I was to go to a GAA centre, they would probably be looking at history from their particular angle. I mean, I think the Orange has actually been very open to engaging with a lot of people who wouldn't stick their hands up and be out on the 12th of July, to be quite honest with you. And very recently, an Irish language academic has produced a book in Irish on the deaths of Orange men at the hands of terrorists, both UVF terrorists, UDA terrorists, and IRA and INLA. So things have moved. I do agree with Bertie. Things have moved. The fact that there's only 2 Catholics, I think is how you described those 2 people you named. They're also 2 nationalists. The Orange Order is a Protestant organisation. Of course, they're going to talk about people who are Protestant. I don't think we should get hung up on that. The fact that they engage widely with other organisations now, I think, is a really positive thing. And I think other organisations could actually learn from the outreach work that they're doing, not just with other organisations, but actually with young people as well. So that's my answer to that one.
Thank you both. And the final question of the night.
I'm not sure I'm going to have a question, but I would like to disagree with the pessimism expressed by the previous speaker from the floor and endorse more what Bertie has just said. I'm old enough to remember Arlene's predecessor throwing snowballs at Bertie's predecessor, and I think it I think it is important to remember how far we have moved since those days. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much. Final word from each of you. I'm tempted to ask you what you want for Christmas. I'm tempted to ask you if you could ever see yourself back in elected politics, either of you. Bertie, we'll go with you.
Well, when I saw David Cameron getting the...
We need an upper house in the Dáil. We need an upper house in the Dáil.
I immediately put my phone back off, and so listen. It's good. It's good to be alive, and it's good to be here, and wish everyone a happy and a peaceful Christmas.
Thank you, Bertie. And yes, here. House of Lords, GB News. What else have you left? What other mountains have you left to climb, Arlene Foster? Or have you hung up your elected politics boots?
Well, I have, because I'm in the House of Lords, and you can't be in an elected... Well, you can't be in the House of Commons and be in the House of Lords. You can, of course, be in Stormont and be a peer.
Remember where you heard it first?
But don't worry, I'm not coming back. I'm not going to cause anybody any hassle. No, I'm very much enjoying the Lords. I was talking to Bertie before we came in back from Ghana in Africa. I was there doing some conversations around female leadership. So that's a role I really enjoy. In Ghana, they just have 14.5% of women in their parliament. We have 37% women in the assembly. When I first started in politics 20 years ago, in elected politics, it was a lot less than that, I can assure you. So we have come on in leaps and bounds in terms of female participation in politics in Northern Ireland. And I would like to use the skills and experience I've picked up to try and help in other places around the world. So,
well said. And Bertie, just finally, I'm very struck by the fact that this is 25 years after you signed that agreement. Do you think a night like tonight, and we've talked about it, whatever the flaws, and you've admitted that this agreement was flawed, but whatever has happened in the last 25 years, you're now able to come here. You haven't been heckled yet. Arlene hasn't been heckled yet. There's a bit more civility. A lot of people are alive today that maybe wouldn't have been alive. Your final thought?
Yeah, listen, I think debates like this, and I congratulate the library for all the work that they do and all the effort they put in. And I know they have lots of debates like this and do a great job of keeping a very ancient tradition. So, but I think all these things are good. In a few weeks' time, in the Royal Irish Academy in Dublin, I know there's a debate around the Downing Street Declaration, and so I think all these discussions are good, and people being involved in being actively involved. If I've one concern, I just hope that there's another generation that will come behind Arlene and me who will put their name forward in politics, because that's, I think, a big issue. A lot of people have an interest in politics, but it's getting harder and harder for people to actually participate. It's a tough game. It's no good saying it's not, and it's maybe tougher even for women than it is for men, because I listen to what the women are saying in Dáil Éireann and in the House of Commons. So I do hope that people will continue to be activists and take an interest, because whatever you say about other systems, I mean, democracy is good. People run, they stand, they do their best. You have an election. You don't want to go down the road of, when you watch these far right thugs the other day who just think that they can do what they like, and we see the autocracies around in other parts of the world. So I think it's not a bad old system we have in this world, and we need to keep it.
Well said, Bertie. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to Baroness Foster, to Bertie Ahern, and thank you to everyone for coming here tonight. And thank you to the Linen Hall Library. Thank you.